Welcome to Legacy Sips and Tips podcast with your geeky host, Lindsay Wheeler, where we talk about everything from death, preparing for your future through estate planning, life, the occasional breakup, entrepreneurship, general nerdery, and of course travel, snowboard, and always wine. Welcome to Legacy Sips and Tips with your host, Lindsay Wheeler, and today we're going to talk about when do you know when it's time to get an estate plan? Not right before you die. Not then. Spoiler alert. Just let you know. Don't do it. When do you know when you should get an estate plan? Again, a lot of people think, oh, I have to have ponies, yachts, and chalets to get an estate plan. That's not true. Pretty much everybody has an estate. And I think the statistic is pretty high that, most people think that they don't have enough or have the assets, if you will, to necessitate an estate plan. But actuality, you do. It is just a vehicle to avoid probate. I should say the ones that I focus on are a vehicle to avoid probate. That's your revocable living trust. Of course, there's other benefits to them, but that's what I primarily focus on because if you've ever experienced the hellish nightmare of what probate is, this is a way to avoid that. And that is, again, through your estate plan and that revocable living trust. So when would you be inclined to get one done? What would be a triggering factor in your life to say, hey, I'm a full-on adult right now, I should probably get an estate plan in place. So the first milestone in someone's life that they may consider getting an estate plan in place is if you get married. So a lot of people get married when they're young, they have a spouse. That is two reasons that should trigger potentially having an estate plan in place. One is that you hope you are married for the rest of your days and forever and ever, and you love them till death. Likelihood of that happening? 50% plus not happening, because welcome to the statistics in our country. However, there are two reasons why an estate plan when you get married might be important. One is prior to being married, you have assets in your marriage that you want to keep separate from the marriage. So a nice complement to having that estate plan in place is having that prenup. And I always say everybody who's getting married should have a prenup. The reason why is because you are liking each other. The likelihood of your marriage failing is fairly high. And we would like to contract our obligations and our, what we're going to do if we are no longer going to get married while we like each other still, not when we hate each other and we're getting divorced. So prenups are really nice to have that in place because you are providing for what happens if that marriage is to not work out. And I always say, of course, we don't expect our marriages to fail, but it's like the airplane. We all fly in a plane. We don't expect the plane to go down, but I'm very happy that I have that safety briefing and I know what to do in the event that it does. Okay. Same thing with a prenup. It always also puts everybody out on notice. There's no secrets. Everybody is out front with what they have and it's transparent at that point. So it's a nice way to talk about your money mindset with your partner. It's a nice way to talk about expectations of the marriage and what have you. So there's no surprises. It's a nice preliminary document and discussion to have with your soon-to-be spouse. If somebody gets upset that you're signing a prenup and are not wanting to marry you after that, then maybe you should question why they're marrying you in the first place. So it's kind of a nice barometer for that. So with that, if you do want to keep separate property separate, again, you'll have that agreement that particularly if you're in a community property state that you are contractually putting forth the terms of your marriage and what happens in the event of dissolution. And with that, you would then put your separate assets typically into your own separate estate plan. So there's double insulation there that not only do you have that agreement, but you've also kept those assets separate from your spouse and from that marital aspect of your marriage, if you will. That's the important part of that, of keeping those things separate. Say, for instance, you're going to maybe get a big inheritance from a relative or something. Inheritance is always separate property until the time in which you commingle that asset. So say you get a nice, $100,000 from great grandpa Bob, and you wanted to keep that separate, maybe for you, maybe you have children from another marriage or what have you, you would put that into a separate account, separate estate plan to provide for where you want it to go, and you keep it separate from your marriage. Where we have problems is when you start commingling that money. So say you put that money, that inheritance that was technically separate property in the beginning, you commingle it into your joint marital account, that now has been transmuted or changed into a community asset. So you might lose your control over that asset in the event of dissolution. So always keep that in mind. Keep your separate assets separate if you want them to be held that way in a community property state. always check with your family law practitioners as well. So that is a good triggering time to get an estate plan in place. With that, you're getting married. Yay, what a cool, joyous event. You want to provide for each other. You want to make sure that everything's taken care of if one of you were to pass away or to become incapacitated or infirm. Having those documents in place is so great. What a wonderful wedding gift to have somebody give you. You know, you can put on one of those things where they can contribute to your honeymoon and they can buy patio furniture for you. Why don't you put legal fees on there for them to get your estate plan in place? That's a, I know, heartwarming gift, but it is a really cool gift, honestly, because then you guys all have that set up and you can go forward with your life from there. And again, of course, they are flexible. They move with your life. So then you get married, maybe you have kids, you can put them in there. Maybe you're a blended family. Maybe you're coming from two different families and you want to make sure that those terms are set out in that estate plan for what happens if one of you passes away for those children in that blended family, whatever it is. So that's usually the biggest first trigger, is that you're getting married. Today, our wine is another gift for one of my clients. This is Lazar, which is an interesting one. So these guys were hobby winemakers out of Sonoma, actually, in Sebastopol. And this is actually their brand that they had made. It's a 2021 Zinfandel. They had it made out in Middleton, California, even though they had their tasting room in Sonoma. It was really interesting talking with them, that was kind of their hobby thing that they did for many, many years. Her husband was a guy who sold CDs. I know, for you kids out there, that's what we call a compact disc. It's that round thing with colors on it. Yeah, he used to sell those to companies to record their stuff on them or whatever, like AOL. It's another old one for you kids. You'd get a disc in the mail, CD, and that you'd put in your computer to get your internet, if you will. So he made those and sold those to companies. So this was their little hobby winery, and so I was really stoked that they gave me a bottle of this because I always like trying people's stuff. So yeah, this is a 2021 Zin that they made as their little hobby out of Lodi fruit out of Sonoma. Next one is, maybe you do not believe in the institution of marriage because it is a governmental paperwork and you don't want the government in your relationship. Cool. Awesome. I'm kind of more toward that leaning as well. So in that event that you might have a committed relationship, you might have a partnership, you might be with that person for 60 years, but you're not technically married in the eyes of the government. Well, what happens then? Well, now you're basically treated as strangers. No matter how long you've been with that person, you're not typically usually able to advocate for that person for medical decisions. You're not able to handle financial aspects for them. You're not entitled to any kind of inheritance rights or any kind of death benefits, what have you, because you're not technically married and you're not kin, if you will. That's where estate planning is super important. Maybe you're in a non-traditional relationship, in a same-sex marriage or something like that, and maybe the laws of your state don't recognize that or what have you. This is super important because, again, you could be with that person for 50 years, and if something were to happen, maybe they're in the hospital, that hospital won't let you in to see them. That hospital won't let you make those decisions without the appropriate paperwork in place. So it's super important to do that. And again, you have no governmental obligations through that actual marriage to provide for each other or to have those safeguards in place for that transferring of assets when you pass away. So important to have that in place, that estate plan in place if you are in a non-traditional relationship or blended, same-sex marriage or something like that, a relationship, to make sure that those items are in place and those safeguards are in place so you're able to advocate for your loved one and for your partner that you've been with forever or not forever, whatever it is. So again, you could be with somebody for 40 years, and if they are sick in the hospital, you may not be able to, and more than likely would not be able to go in because you're not related. I don't care how long you've been with them. You're not able to make medical decisions for them. You would not be able to handle finances for them because you're technically not married. So always keep that in mind. It's a horrible, harsh thing. And then oftentimes, if we're in those non-traditional relationships, sometimes we have strained relationships with our family members. And so not having that in place may give our crappy family, who is never loving or accepting, the ability to come in and now advocate for you when you don't want them to. That's a scary thing too. So having that estate plan in place, very important. So that's how we usually think when we get married in any kind of aspect or have a committed relationship, and we want to provide for our other partner or our spouse, that an estate plan is a really nice way to do that, of course. The other triggering event is you have some kiddos. You've decided to set forth your loins to produce children's, or whatever that term is, and now you have some kiddos. So super important is what's going to happen to your kiddos if, God forbid, something happens to you. Okay? Making sure that guardianship nomination is stated and set forth in your will, pour over will, and your estate plan, and through your revocable living trust. Is that, again, maybe you don't want your parents raising your kid because you feel like they weren't the best parents, or maybe they're just not able to. Maybe they're not with us. Maybe they are infirm themselves. Maybe they wouldn't be able to handle a 4-year-old, if you will. And you want your best friend down the street who has the same, ideals and methodology of you that you would want to raise your children as. Very important to have that written down so a court, if they needed to, would follow your wishes because you've provided those wishes for them to follow. Through your estate plan, that guardianship nomination, very, very important to do that. Very important. You don't want something to happen to you or to the other parent and those children end up in foster care or into the system. You absolutely want them to go to your best friend without your best friend having to go to the court and advocate and have to get guardianship and to fight for those children. You wouldn't want your best friend, if you want them to be raising your children, fighting your family because your family sucks, but they think, oh, this is part of you and we're going to do that. Very, very, very important to make sure that that is listed out if you have underage children, to put where those kids are going to go if you're not here. With that, making sure too that in that estate plan, that if something were to happen to you, then you have a home, you have, investments, you have bank accounts, whatever it is, and say you have quite a nice, career that you're building up and you have that money, that if you have underage children and you have nothing in place, again, first off, they're going to deal with the death of losing their parents at a younger age. But then with that, they're not going to have access to those funds until 18. So within the estate plan and that guardianship nomination, your estate, if you will go to raising your children like you hopefully would have raised them yourself. So your best friend, whoever is now your guardian nomination, is now taking your children to raise them. They have the access of your funds to help do that and take that burden off of them for raising your children. So that's a very important reason to have that estate plan in place, because it also gives the accessibility through your successor trustee and through your estate to have that access of funds to raise your children. With that too, if you don't have that in place, at 18, those children are going to get it all in one lump sum. Just let that sink in, that if you have some investments, you have a house, you have whatever it is, maybe you have $100,000, $500,000, $1 million at the end of the day. At 18, they get all of that money. Again, I was not responsible at 18. I'm not responsible now. You gave me $100,000. I'm 100% going and getting a Porsche. I might get a Lamborghini. I don't know. Let's see how the day treats me. You know what I mean? Are we going to the Chateau Villa in the middle of France? 100%. So you can put those parameters in there so they don't blow their inheritance. They don't blow that generational wealth. You can then, again, still parent from beyond the grave, which is super cool. You can put those parameters in there. Standard language that we usually put in there, upon 18, that child will receive 25% of the estate to be used for reasonable education expenses. Again, the kid's not going and getting a Porsche coming to school, okay? Maybe paying for their books, maybe paying for their board and housing, maybe they get a little apartment, maybe they live at the dorms or whatever, which oftentimes a Porsche might be cheaper these days. But anywho, I digress. Maybe at 25, we can give them another 25% to be used for additional education. Maybe they want to go to medical school, law school, they want to get a master's, they want to get a PhD or whatever. They can continue their education and they'll have an additional 25% to help them with that goal. Maybe you could put in there too that if they're not that way, they can have that percentage to be used for starting a business or putting a down on a house or something like that. So helping them still create that wealth for themselves and carrying on your legacy and generational wealth that way. And then maybe at 30, they get the rest of it, whatever it is, hopefully they're responsible by 30. Maybe you put a benchmark 35, maybe 40, maybe 45, whatever it is. Again, like my friend, F them kids, 55, financial literacy class. You can put those in there. You can put grade requirements in there. You can play with it. You can do whatever you want. That's the cool thing about it, is that you're still governing your children and raising them from beyond the grave when you're not here. Totally cool. So that's a big reason for having that estate plan. One, that guardianship nomination, and two, setting out those parameters for your kids. So big milestone on setting an estate plan up is having children. That honestly, you should automatically have life insurance in place, and you should have an estate plan if you have children, period. That's just my belief, but me doing this for 20 plus years, let me tell you how much easier it would have been for a lot of families to having those things in place for them. Okay. The next milestone that's a big one is if you buy a home. Cool, you've worked really hard, especially in this day and age, you've actually been able to get a home. Ooh, that's a pretty big milestone these days. You have worked really hard for that. Why would you not take the little extra step in providing and protecting that home that you've just worked really hard for? This day and age, what's a house costing? $300,000, $400,000, $500,000, $600,000, $800,000, whatever it is. You have spent that amount of time and effort to buy a property. Why would you not want to protect it for your loved ones to avoid having to get it go through probate, or to have maybe the state take a percentage of it or an attorney take a percentage of that amount? And we'll get into what that looks like, with the attorneys taking percentages of estates. But you've spent enough money to get this done. Your closing costs, appraisal costs, realtor costs, or whatever. Just spend a little bit more, because you're already spending it as it is, to get that estate plan in place. And again, you get more properties, you sell that property, whatever it is, you move, those flow with your life. That's the cool thing about that estate plan, is it still moves to your life. Again, we're not set in stone. We're not going 40 years out. We're doing 1 to 3. Get a new home, great, put it in an estate plan. Then you're saving your loved ones the costs on the back end by doing a little bit of pre-planning, and then helping yourself as well by doing that estate plan. And then another triggering time for getting an estate plan is that, say you don't like your children. We do the best we can of raising our children, but sometimes people are just people and personalities, and whatever it is, no matter how good of a parent you are, no matter what you've done or how perfect you've been, sometimes people just don't turn out okay. Okay, it happens. It's a reality. How do you stop that person or your child from getting all of your stuff? Because maybe they have drug or alcohol issues. Maybe they have a gambling issue. Maybe they have some other, deficiency or some issue that they have. Maybe they're in and out of jail. Maybe they're making poor decisions with their lives. Maybe you don't want them to have any access to your assets because they will self-destruct with it, or they haven't talked to you. Maybe they're just crummy people. When's the last time your kids checked in with you? Okay, double check with that. So that's a nice way for an estate plan, is that you can cut people out. And please don't be those people who are like, oh, I'm going to leave them $1. Nope. Leaving them $1 creates a beneficiary designation, and that we as practitioners may have to go find that crappy kid that you haven't talked to in 25 years, and we don't know where they are because maybe they're homeless in Florida. Don't do that. It can hold up an estate. What you would do instead is put affirmative language that that person is absolutely cut out, that they are not to receive anything by way of your will, your trust, your estate plan, intestate succession. You have very clearly, to a level that a 4th grade class could understand, that you don't want them to have anything. Easy, easy peasy. We can just put that language in there. That is informative, it's instructive, and a court can follow that and enforce that if they need to. So just being very clear with it. I know it sucks. I know we don't want to talk about our kids being crappy kids, but it also happens a lot. I talk to a lot of clients, and I'll ask them, okay, so you have 2 kids. And they're like, actually, we have 3, but we don't talk to one. They're estranged. Or one client whose kid is frankly in a cult. So yeah, he hasn't talked to her in some time, and he doesn't want his money going to this cult, if you will. It's not one of the ones you think about, but it's a different weird one in California. Yay, California. So important for that. And for instance, on that example, is we do have an estate plan set up for him. He did have his children on there. We had the parameters in there that money for her was to be used only for her personal, expenses, if you will. Maybe she needs a house or a car or whatever it is. And that money is not able to be used for donations to a charity, a cult, if you will, or whatever, organization she's a part of. And that money would be managed by her mother. Okay, so you can put that in there. He has now changed his mind. He's decided, you know what, I still haven't talked to her in the last 5 years. Again, he's reviewing it every 3 to 5 years, and he's like, I don't want her to have anything. She's obviously enmeshed in this so much. She's really no longer my child. I haven't talked to her in so much time. Let's just remove her completely, and let's give it to my 2 siblings. Great, no problem. See how easy estate planning is, and how cool that is, that you still have control over everything, and you're able to change your mind with the circumstances. So that's a really cool one. So again, crappy kids we want to cut out, absolutely can do that through our estate plan. If you did not do that, then they would go through what we call, again, intestate succession. And that crappy kid who's in a cult, who you haven't talked to in 20 years, would have entitlement to your assets. They would have entitlement to your life. So Very important to have that in place. And then finally, another really good barometer of when you should have an estate plan in place is that you're starting to get up there in years and you don't have anything in place. You're starting to deal with your mortality. You're starting to deal with those things and think about those things. Maybe you've had your close person or friends. Your friends are starting to knock off, because you're at that age. Then you should really consider getting that estate plan in place, because we want to make sure that we get that in place while you still are here. You have the capacity to do so. You're still mentally able to advocate for yourself and to create these legal documents, if you will. Because if you start getting a little wackadoo and you start forgetting things and you do not have that capacity, maybe you have dementia, you have late stage Alzheimer's or something like that, and you don't know who you are, we can't do anything for you because you do no longer have the capacity to contract, if you will. So if you were not able to go buy a car because you don't have the capacity to do so, you're not able to create a estate plan either. Very important. So once you start getting at those latter years, maybe you've retired. That's another good benchmark at that latter years. You've retired now. Whoops, okay, now we really need to get that estate plan in place because now you're retired, you have that time, you're transitioning into that next stage of life, which is wonderful. You have that time to go travel, hopefully a lot. Obviously travel as much as you can when you're younger and fit to do so, but of course a lot of people wait till they retire to go travel. Perfect time to get that estate plan in place, because what if you're on a cruise ship and you get some weird foreign bug that goes to the cruise ship? Like I think there was one recently where the cruise people all had this crazy virus and everyone threw up all their plane. They had to ground the plane to clean it so much. And I don't want to ever fly on that plane after that kind of event. So think about those things. Again, bad things happen, but that's another benchmark when you start getting older and you're starting to think about that. Maybe you've retired just now. Your retirement gift for yourself should be an estate plan. So those are kind of the benchmarks that we look at of when we should create an estate plan. Obviously, they start from very young all the way up to when you're older. It is a movable living document that flows with your life. So you should get it set up in the beginning, have your kids graduate, kids go on, you've retired now. All these benchmarks that happen should be necessitated within that estate plan for yourself because it does flow with your life. So of course, you have questions on how to get that set up or get a little stuck about what should go into your estate plan, just let me know. Again, we have that workbook you can download. I have resources all over the place, or you can just talk to me and we can have that discussion. So, of course, when you think of death, think of me. Thank you for listening to this podcast. If you found value, please like, subscribe, and share. And be sure to follow me on all the socials at Sips and Tips with Lindsay. And of course, you can always go to my website, sipsandtipswithlindsay.com, to find more information about estate planning, business, snowboard, travel, and of course, wine. As always, we have to get the legal stuff out of the way. I went to law school, so you don't have to. However, we have to read the special disclaimer that I am not a practicing attorney. I am not your attorney. I am not offering any legal advice in any content or any episode. All content is for your information and educational purposes only. It is not a substitute for seeking your own legal advice from your own attorney or other professionals such as a CPA or financial advisor. I cannot give legal advice and do not offer any legal services or legal advice, but I do offer some fun and educational content for you to enjoy.